Hey there, and welcome back to Family Twist. I'm Corey. Today's episode is a little bit different because this wasn't just a podcast interview, it was really a therapy session for Kendall. Our guest is Bryan, one of the world's leading experts in trauma and adoption. He's also an adoptee himself, and that combination makes for some incredibly human insight. Bryan brought so much compassion and thoughtfulness to this conversation. He really saw Kendall, not just as a podcast host or a story, but as a person still navigating what it means to be adopted, found, and still sometimes lost. If you've struggled with identity, regulation, or how to love your people without losing yourself, please stick around. Bryan doesn't just have theories, he has answers and grace. Let's go.
Well, welcome to Family Twist, Bryan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I want our listeners to get a feel for your kind of specialty in therapy and what got you there.
Okay. Well, my fundamental specialty is around the area of children who've been adopted or in foster care, significant trauma histories that lead to severe behavior challenges. And then that creates a lot of family stress. And so for probably the last 25 years, my whole focus has been around helping parents understand themselves differently so they can understand their children differently and create breakthroughs in their relationships in their homes to save placements, because high-risk adoptive and foster placements usually end up in either disruptions or children getting into being passed around in foster care. And so that's pretty much been my entire life's work, and it started because this is what God intended for me to do. I was conceived to a woman out of wedlock. She could not keep me, so she placed me into foster care, and subsequently I was adopted. And then my parents, who loved my sister and I, who was also adopted, loved us very much, very consistent, very predictable, but they were also very traditional, and they both had really extreme trauma histories themselves, which no one during the 70s knew anything about trauma, really knew anything about adoption or anything like that. So my parents, both children of alcoholics, my dad, a Vietnam veteran with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. My mom, her dad, when she was 9 years old, had a heart attack, fell over in front of her dad at the kitchen table. All of her younger siblings all had different stories for how he died because no one ever talked about it. And so my parents were also the oldest, and this is important when it comes to realizing some of the challenges that they had, because my dad was the oldest son of a sibling group of 9. My mom was the oldest daughter of a sibling group of 10. And so they grew up in a very parentified way. They were basically parent figures because their mothers were busy working. My grandmother's busy working, trying to keep a roof over the children's head and food on the table. My parents became parent figures to their siblings, which led them to be very hyper responsible. So that was great in one hand because my parents didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they didn't party, they worked hard. You know, my dad worked in a rock quarry for 35 years. I have many experiences of him coming home covered in limestone dust. And my mom was a Head Start instructor. She drove 2 hours round trip every single day. They were very consistent that way. But what they weren't is emotionally present because they had never grown up with parents able to be emotionally present. Also, they didn't understand the stress of adopted children. So my sister and I, having a lot of sensitivities, we had a lot of struggles. I wrote a book called The Great Behavior Breakdown, which chronicles 26 severe behaviors that children have, and I had almost all of those. However, my sister and I had very drastically different in utero experiences, and this is where it starts for all of us. My biological mother, when I met her at the age of 37, said one of the first things to me, I love being pregnant. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I exercised, I ate all the right foods. And she said it was the hardest thing for me to have to place you for adoption. I had 3 half siblings older than me, but my in utero experience was good. It was solid. So my brain developed in a different way. My sister, on the other hand, was 3 months premature. Her mother drank alcohol, may have used drugs. She weighed 3.5 pounds when she was born and spent the first 3 months of her life in an incubator. So and this is in the 70s. So her early experience was completely different. So then what happens is that leads to an infant's brain from the very beginning stages able to tolerate stress in a different way. Now, we were both stress sensitive, and this is how I assimilate all of this for parents to understand. And my work is not just for adopted and foster children. It actually applies to human behavior all across the board. But the way I assimilate this and to simplify it is that if you have a child who's been adopted, you have a child who's been in foster care, you have a stress-sensitive and fearful child. So once the child becomes stressed, which is easy to do when your brain is wired that way, then you have a difficult time regulating that stress. From my in utero experience, I was able to regulate it more effectively. So then I could also recover from stress. So what's stress? Well, stress is any external or internal event which knocks the body out of balance. So for a child, that could be something as simple as being hungry. That could be something as simple as doing something you're not supposed to. Your parent gets on to you and you have a stress reaction. It could be going to school. Those are all stressful environments. So for me, I was able to regulate that stress better. I could get in trouble, which was stressful. And getting in trouble for us, for my sister and I, was usually getting yelled at or being whipped or being sent to our room or having something taken away. Very traditional, mind you. But given a couple of hours, I could regulate. My sister could not because of her experience. So within that couple of hours where I can regulate that stress, that overwhelming stress, and recover, that couple of hours would go past. And instead of being able to regulate her stress, my sister would still be in a dysregulated place, which would cause her to not respond as quickly, would cause her to continue doing some of the things that she had just gotten in trouble for, and then she would get in trouble again. So I covered not get in trouble, and so that helped navigate me through my family and through school. I could go into that stressful environment regulated enough, and then I had very healthy social and emotional relationships. Although I had all these behavior problems, I could get in trouble, I could recover. My sister, not. She would get in trouble. She couldn't recover. She was emotionally stunted. So the difference for she and I was night and day. It was only because my brain was able to handle stress differently than her brain. And so then that just navigated us throughout our childhood. And that really, every moment I had growing up informed me and informs me now for everything that I do and that I try to teach parents. So I have, over 25 years, developed what I call a love-based approach to parenting, as opposed to what I believe is a very traditional, common fear-based approach to parenting, which we don't understand. But I also believe that fear-based approach to parenting is generationally programmed. I believe that's programmed in our DNA, and it also is rooted in trauma. And I can go so deep into this stuff because it's all I do. I love it. I'll let you decide where you want to go with that.
I am fascinated by this concept. And if you know anything about my story, I didn't know anything about my birth until 2017. Well, what I did know was that I was premature, but I have since learned my biological mother's family, that my mother smoked, that she didn't, like a lot of the things that you just described for your sister. And I always wondered about that because, that concept, I wasn't terribly familiar with it, but I at least had heard of that, what you just described. And I always in the back of my mind was like, wow, I never seemed to react to things exactly like my adoptive parents did, and I thought, oh, well, that's just because I'm not their child. But now I see that there's so much research out there about what happens in utero and how important that is for the child,
Yes.
And quote, I didn't really have behavioral issues, but I definitely wasn't my adoptive parents. And yeah, they were more traditional, they were born in the pictures. I think treated the same way by the both sets of parents. It was a very utilitarian sort of part of the society. And my dad used to joke and say he was 12th of 13. And he said by the time he came along, I think they were just creating farming. He never got the warm and fuzzies from and that sort of thing. But my adoptive parents were, I think, quite the opposite with me. I feel like they were so loving and so, they had been trying to have a child for 7 years by the time they got me, so it was such a positive for them that they were like, we're going to defy all of those things that happened in our past and we're going to raise him differently. Yeah, I have so much
Can
respect.
I speak to that, Kendall? Because I would
Yes.
wager to believe that your parents didn't have severely traumatized parents themselves. Now, they had parents who probably weren't as emotionally present because that was a time of survival. So there wasn't a lot of time for warm and fuzzies. But what they had was a contained life. There was lots of siblings. They worked the farm, so they had food. They survived with love. And that helped them to grow up in what I call a more regulated fashion. If you contrast that with my parents basically grew up with single parents, in the 50s, and fathers who were alcoholics, and mothers had to work 2 and 3 jobs, and their experience of survival was different. So you had parents who grew up with parents who actually parented and siblings, and they felt connected. And so when you came into that home, you said you didn't have behavior problems. The reason you didn't have behavior problems is because you had parents who were regulated and attuned to you so that the experience of stress for you wasn't as heightened. And when you did get in trouble, even if you may have gotten punished traditionally, you had 90% of the rest of the environment to help you to soothe and to calm down so that you could recover. It's very important that we understand those very early nuances that occur in the lives of individuals. John Bowlby said the first 3 years of your life established the blueprints for all your future social and emotional relationships. But after the 90s, which was the decade of the brain, we now know it was from conception to the age of 5. And Nadine Burke-Harris, in her book, The Deepest Well, says that in the first year of life, the human brain forms 1 million neural connections per second. Even though in utero there may have been some challenges, you had a lot of good stuff from the very beginning helping to rewire and reshape your brain in a way that it could tolerate stress more effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I've always found it so fascinating just in talking with friends and experiencing my friends' families growing up. Not always, but I was in my mind always comparing and contrasting because my adoptive parents, they were so close with their just spoke on the phone as often as they could, just very well connected. Yet my best friend, whose name I won't mention, he'll know who I'm talking about, his whole family was right in our town. And I felt like they never even, it was so different. The dynamics were so different. Being raised as an only child, I loved that my parents were so connected to their siblings and that I got to know all my extended, crazy number of cousins. Sure. And it was fantastic. And having now met my biological family on both sides, I can tell that they don't engage the same way, and I try not to be critical of that, but I wish it for them. I wish it for myself. Yes. With them. And it's just never going to be the way it was when I grew up.
It's the significance of generational trauma. Trauma can be passed down through the DNA. Research now says up to 15 generations. And so when you have traumatic events that occur in the generations, that gets passed forward. And that's how one family can stay really close knit and another family who grows up together can actually be warring with one another the whole time because they have some significant breakdown in the attachment bond of their lineage that just doesn't get healed. And it's not until some person, and Ed Milet calls it the one comes along and says, hey, I'm going to do this differently, that they actually start shifting that. And I see it in my adoptive parents in their in their siblings, their sibling groups. There's one, my dad's sibling group. They had a lot of alcoholism. They had sexual abuse. They loved one another, but they were pretty much disconnected. And then my mom's sibling group, they were pretty connected, but they had siblings who branched off because they had their own traumas that had not ever been healed. And not even as adults, they have challenges in their relationships. So it's just an observation. It's not a critique. And it just helps us understand ourselves better.
I joke and say that I'm just selfish because I want back what I feel like I used to have. And you can't force it, right? Like I can't tell you how many times in my biological family I've heard people say, that's just not the way we, act. And I was like, to me, it just, I want to, like you just mentioned, I want to be the one that says, can we just fix this?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not that simple. And I get it. And they're comfortable with their approach to each other. But I just dreamt that it would be different. I thought, because I was so tight with my adoptive family, so I just wished that I still, and, it may or may happen. I have resolved myself. It's been, I just had the 8th anniversary of finding all these people. And I have delusions of grandeur too. I thought, I'm the oldest. I'm going to walk in and everybody's going to respect me and I'm going to be the patriarch. And, I try to be optimistic, and I think I set myself up for some disappointment. Thank you so much for explaining like how you got to, where your own research, your own books. I find it fascinating. We always say podcast, we purposely don't want to know too much about the work for everybody. And it's going to be on our show notes. The book that first interested me is From Fear to Love. And so I can't wait to read that. But I'm also really curious about, and I'm not a parent, everybody knows that. I am really curious about Bondify AI. Can you talk about that
I'd
app?
love to. I have a belief that especially after COVID, most mental health professionals started doing virtual therapy. And I've spent my entire professional career working with families in their homes, in their living rooms. So I traveled all around the world for 15 years, just working very intensely with people in their living rooms. The concept of working with someone, even in an office, is pretty foreign to me, much less working with someone virtually. I feel like you just miss 80% of the dynamics. And so after COVID, all these mental health professionals just started doing virtual therapy all the time. And we've really moved away, and I don't think it's going to change. We've really moved away from being in person, much less being in someone's home. So I'm like, once I developed my love-based parenting model and kind of my models and theories on regulation and relationships, I realized that I can probably create it where, because over the years, lecturing and everything else, parents are always like, can you come home with me? And I was like, I would love to. And I used to do that, but I could probably create an app where you can talk to me on your phone, just like you're talking to me. And this is what AI allowed. I can program it. Bondify is programmed with all of my knowledge base. And it's basically like a text communication where in a time of escalation or crisis or uncertainty, all you've got to do is open Bondify and you can ask me any question and I'm going to give you a response. And I had a parent tell me the other day at a lecture, I've gone in my bathroom and talked to you and I feel like I'm talking to you, because I believe that if I can give you, before a crisis really hits, if I can just give you one opportunity to see it differently, I can completely change the direction of that outcome or where it's headed. And so that's what Bondify is. Bondify is an AI-powered parenting support app, which gives parents an opportunity to talk to me and get guidance in a love-based way, in a regulated way, to completely change how they may have handled a situation before. And then we wrap that around educational tools and resources, as well as a community of other parents who are going through some of the same challenges. And, it's really training, because I'll have parents come into the community they'll post a question or a challenge that's going on, and they completely forget to ask the AI. So then I'll go
Yeah.
in, I'll copy and paste, I'll ask the AI, get the AI's answer, and put it back into the chat because it's that good. Because if
Yeah.
therapists are intent on doing virtual therapy, eventually they're going to be out of jobs because AI is just faster, it's just better, and it's just going to continue to get better. And so I think that being in person with someone's going to become a premium service because so many mental health professionals aren't going to be comfortable in doing it anymore. I just love being in someone's home. I mean, I'll go next week, I'll be in the home of 3 or 4 families simply because I have an agency and that's what we do. We go in to work with high-risk families.
I'm so glad that you're able and willing to still do that because I've been in therapy for years. I support everybody, using that platform. And for me, when it can be in person, it's so much more meaningful. I feel like my gains are so much more pronounced than they would be, and I don't want to discredit, having virtual options because, we live in a fast-paced society. And for some people, that's all they can
Sure.
handle. I get it. But I know I have benefited so much from in-person experiences. So was there any pivotal when you realized that love-based parenting was the way? Was there like an epiphany
I've
moment?
had lots of epiphany moments throughout my life that, I call them the light bulb moments or God tapping me on my head. And there's just been so many. Probably one of the biggest is that I had studied with a psychiatrist for several years and got really immersed in her model of working with families and was going to write a book. In fact, did write a book and was going to publish it. It was based on her work. And for a number of reasons, I never published that book. And a couple of years later, after I'd done more research and more practice, I went back and reviewed it and realized that even though her approach was different from the other approaches in attachment and bonding work with children, it was still a fear-based approach. Understanding that there is a big difference between a fear-based approach and a love-based approach, yet it's a very thin line. And that was a significant moment for me. The other moments were reflections when I realized how my own sister growing up, her biggest challenges and struggles had come from the fact that nobody understood her. They didn't understand that she was stress sensitive. They didn't understand that she was overwhelmed. They didn't understand that she was emotionally arrested and she was doing the best that she can. So they would just increase more stress because that's what we do in our society. If something's not working, you just do more of it. So if one whipping's not enough, you whip more. If yelling at 1 decibel isn't loud enough, you up the ante. And I realized that approach was actually working against us. There's been so many pivotal moments to get me to a deeper understanding, but really it came from within me. Just understanding my life experience and how the things I experienced and how I showed up informed me to see other people. And when I really had the biggest shift was I read a book by Alan Shore, who wrote this trilogy on affect regulation and the origin of the self. It was all about understanding self-regulation. And I had been asking the question for years, what is it that leads to attachments? Because we have this concept of attachment and bonding, but what people miss is that attachment is the behavior of the child to the parent. Bonding is the behavior of the parent towards the child. And so one morning I was in Canada. I'd been running a residential treatment facility. I was driving. It was early. That question popped back up in my head. What leads to attachment? And God tapped me on the head and said, stress. In that moment, I realized that as long as you're stressed, you cannot develop secure attachment. As long as a child is stressed, they cannot attach to the parent in a secure way. However, as long as the parent is stressed, they cannot create the open system that the child needs to attach to. The bonding system is disrupted, so it's a two-way street. The most important work was in helping children have prolonged experiences of regulation, of calm, and then When there's stress, the most important thing to do is to repair it, because that's how you strengthen the system. See, it's not that stress is the problem. It's our failure to repair the stress that becomes the problem. And that's what we get wrong in traditional parenting practices. When a child acts out, we give them a timeout. I believe children act out because they're stressed out. I believe children don't act out for attention. I believe children act out because they need attention. But when you believe a child acts out for attention, then you've been programmed to not give them positive attention. So you give them a timeout, which means you're sending them away. So if they're acting out because they're stressed out, which means they've gone outside of their window of tolerance, and then you send them away, you're not actually helping their regulatory system to recover. All you're doing is sending them away till they can settle, till their stress can settle, and then they come back to the dynamic. See, that's not helping their regulatory system to grow and mature, because in order for their regulatory system to grow and mature, here's something really important that has to happen. When children experience stress, they release a hormone called cortisol in their brain. Cortisol is the brain's primary stress hormone, so that is the root of stress and fear in the brain. When the cortisol hits the hypothalamus of the child's brain, the hypothalamus is supposed to release a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is the brain's anti-stress hormone. Here's the problem. Cortisol is an automatic reaction in the brain because we get stressed all the time. Oxytocin is a learned response in the brain. So when children are stressed out and acting out, if the parent figure doesn't help them to turn on oxytocin, then the child stays in a constant state of stress. And then what happens is they're not developing an effective oxytocin response. Well, the parent is the only one who can teach the child the effective oxytocin response. But if the parent has been programmed traditionally that when the child is acting out, you actually create more stress through punishment, or you send them away, then you're never helping them to develop. Because when the child gets stressed out, the parent gets stressed out. And so then the parent oftentimes doesn't realize that they hold the keys to the castle of the child's development. So then in our traditional practices of timeout, spanking, consequences, behavior modification, points of rewards, restraint, medication, what happens is children end up growing older, but not growing better, because no one's actually teaching their brain how to regulate the stress. We're just punishing them for the behavior, and the behavior is a byproduct of the stress. So that's what Fear to Love is all about. Fear to Love is really all based around one theoretical model that I developed almost 25 years ago. It's called the stress model, and it says all behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only two primary emotions, love and fear. It's through the expression, the process, and the understanding of the fear that you calm the stress and diminish the behavior. So I started over 20 years ago, I started not focusing on behaviors because behaviors are an outcome. I started focusing on stress and the fear that drives the behavior. When you regulate the source, then the outcome changes. And that's what all my work has been based on. Helping parents learn how to stay regulated. And I'm going to give you an example to illustrate this. The other day, I got a phone call. It was from an older daughter who's helping her mom raise a couple of autistic children. One's 8 years old, and he's really aggressive and has been violent. The daughter called me, and she said, he's got my mom down on the couch, pulled down on the couch, and he has 2 handfuls of hair. Okay, for them, this is a pretty normal process. But mom, and bless this kid's heart and bless their hearts, she's actually trying to handle it in the most calm way that she can. But she doesn't know what to do. And this is, I find parents, they get into this valley when they start exploring my work. They get into this valley where they know, mom knows she's not going to fight the kid, right? She knows that's not the way because that just increases the stress. But she's not sure what to do. So this 8-year-old has her down on the couch, 2 handfuls full of hair. Older daughter calls me. I said, okay, put the phone on speakerphone, go over to mom, And so what I do, because I'm not worried about the child, I'm not worried about the behavior. The behavior is concerning. I'm aware of it, but I know one thing has to happen. And one of the most important things that has, the first thing I've got to do is I have got to get the mom to calm down. Now, that's the exact opposite of what most people do. But I know that that stress is driving that behavior. I know that that child has been hijacked. So I know that I can talk to mom because she can hear me. I know that that child is in a regressed emotional state. He's not 8. He's an aggressive 2-year-old. So I start talking to the mom. She's on speakerphone. I said, Mom, I need you to take some deep breaths. I said, I need you to put your hands on top of his because I don't want him to pull out all your hair, right? So I'm acknowledging the behavior is occurring, but I need you to breathe. I need you to calm down. I need you to relax your body. So she's doing this. He's got these handfuls of hair. This is an intense situation. But the only way this happens is that I'm not getting hijacked. I'm not scared in this moment. So I'm talking to mom, and this is my voice. Mom, I need you to breathe. Put your hands on top of his head. I need you to calm yourself down, relax your body. Because even though she's not fighting with him, she's anxious. She's scared. She doesn't know what to do. I need to change that vibration. She relaxes. And then I said, now tell him he's going to be okay. Just say those words. You're going to be okay. We're going to be all right. We're going to be all right. Now I said, relax your hands and put them around him and say, I've got you. Complete opposite of what most people would do. Because fear causes you to do the exact opposite. Fear is a paradox. Fear causes you to do the exact opposite of what you should do. Mom relaxes her hands. She wraps them around. She says, I got you. She says, I'm going to be okay. I said, hang on to him for a moment. Again, complete opposite. I said, hang on to him for a moment. Tell him I've got you. I can keep you safe. So now he's let go of the hair and now he wants her to let him go. And I said, okay, now you can let him go. So then he gets up because he's still escalated. He's still dysregulated. He's still regressed. He goes into the kitchen and he starts spraying water. And the older daughter, I hear him saying, he's spraying water. I said, that's fine. Go into his bedroom. And she says, he doesn't like being alone. I said, that's even better because that means he's going to follow you. Because what I need to do is I need to get them to contain this. I need him in a contained space. I don't need him having the wide open house, creating all of this stress, sensitivity, and overwhelm. I need you to go in his room because that's contained space. So she says, okay, go in the room. Because also in my mind, see, this is what a fear-based brain does. A fear-based brain says, I can't let him spray the water. Oh my God, he's going to flood the house. It's going to be horrible. There's water everywhere. See, that's what a fear-based brain does. A regulated brain doesn't do that. A regulated brain says, yeah, that water's terrible. We really don't want it, but a couple of big towels, you'll have it cleaned up. Go into his bedroom. As soon as she goes into his bedroom, he follows her to his bedroom. I say to the older daughter, I need you to leave the bedroom. Again, I need to reduce the stress. Mom, close the door, stay in there with him. And he says, I want out. And I said, Mom, tell him you can't let him out because it's too stressful out there and you can't keep him safe. So you need to stay in here. We're going to stay in here until you feel better. Literally, Kendall, within seconds, he said, I'm really sorry. I want to go clean up my mess. And I said to her, I said, keep breathing. Tell him he's okay. Tell him we're going to get through it and you'll help him clean the mess up. And we waited another half a minute. And I said, okay, call me back if you need to, if it escalates. That was it. Now I want to explain something because I know what the traditional approach is, the traditional mindset is. The traditional mindset says, well, you didn't teach him anything, right? Bruce Perry says, and Bruce Perry's a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist. He's written a lot of books with Oprah. He says the brain always returns to the way the event was handled the last time. That is really important. So what I did is I interrupted the dynamic. I created a situation where the child realized that in his stress, he was not at risk, mom was not a threat, and everything was going to be okay. So we navigated that whole dynamic. So the next time he gets stressed in that way, the first memory his brain is going to hit is the memory of how it worked out the last time. Now, because the brain is conditioned, it may not hold up. It may not stop there. But what happens is it has one level that slows the intensity down based on the memory of how it was handled the last time. Now, mom has a memory of how it was handled the last time. So that's setting them up to completely navigate the situation in a different way. 3 to 5 times, because I'm not saying it's not going to happen again, because it might. But remember, this has been happening for years, right? So this is what people don't realize. These behaviors have been happening for years. I'm guaranteeing that if you'll do the same approach in 3 to 5 times, he will completely stop doing that. He will stop attacking mom, because now I've got her seeing a stressed out 2-year-old. This is how you change the paradigm. Because when I could get mom from seeing an 8-year-old who's a predator, and I did the same thing with a mom and a 16-year-old, literally in the same day. I got the mom to see the stressed out. It completely shifts the perspective. And when you shift the perspective, you shift your energy. When you shift your energy, instead of sending off a vibration of fear and stress, now you're creating an opportunity to generate a vibration of love and oxytocin. That is what has got to happen. The brain changes in 2 ways. It changes through repetition and emotional impact. So mom has got to repeat this process. But 2, most importantly, this is what people don't realize. The feeling is the path to the healing. So you've got to have the bad moments. You've got to have them, because the bad moments reflect that the child is in their brainstem. Bad moments reflect that the child was in their pain, they're in their trauma. But the only way you feel that is through the intensity. The vehicle to the healing is the feeling. So that's the emotional impact. So I actually need more of those situations so that mom can walk through it in a different way, because that is the vehicle to healing. See, traditionally, we don't want children to have feelings. We're wired that if children are upset, you got to tell them, you don't yell, you don't talk to me that way. That's not okay. So we are literally suppressing the vehicle to healing at every turn. And that's because it's generationally conditioned. That's just our mindset.
Thank you for describing that. I find it fascinating. Shout out to my adoptive parents who accidentally approached me correctly, but well before your research even got started. It gives me a lot of respect for parents who are trying to do it right. And I just urge people to take advantage of, not only your books, but also this really cool concept that I think you developed with the Bondify app. I think that's just amazing. I could have used it this week, not in relation to children. I had to de-escalate myself, and that's rare, but I was just triggered and pissed off. And I was like, Kendall, just bite your tongue. Just speak. Now, I did go back to the situation later in the week and, politely confronted the aggressor. We can all learn some lessons, I think, from, even though I'm not a parent, I feel like I could still learn some psychological lessons that would be beneficial in my daily life.
Can I give you a little homework assignment? And I'm just, for giggles. You could download Bondify and use that. Everyone can you can try it for 14 days free. There's no obligation. And even after that, if you choose to continue Bondify, it's literally less than $20 a month. So for a year, you get 24 hours, 7-day access to me for less than a couple of therapy sessions. But here's what I would ask you to do. Go to ChatGPT, and I want you to say, I want you to be Bryan Post, right? And put it in, because it's already ChatGPT knows Bryan.
Yeah.
I want you to be Bryan Post. Here's the scenario I had. How would Bryan Post advise me on dealing with this scenario? And watch what happens.
I will do it. I do use AI. I'm very curious because I was surprised by myself, and I joke about this is a cop-out, but I've found myself saying a couple of times recently that the older I get, the less patient I am. I don't know that that's true, but I do feel like sometimes I have these visceral reactions and I'm saying internally, like I should win an Emmy for my, behavior every day because I'm in HR and I need to hold my shit together.
That's fantastic. I pretty much can't have a conversation without seeing it in this lens, because this is just kind of my paradigm. But there are two really important things. Number one, Joseph Ledoux is a New York University neuroscientist, and this is really important for HR. I have an HR director. I know she's up to her eyeballs all the time. He wrote a book called The Emotional Brain. He says one really important thing. He says in times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. So the moment we become stressed, we're no longer thinking clearly, and we can't remember. So what that tells us is that the most important thing that we can do in any given moment is stop and breathe. Stop and take 3 to 10 deep breaths in any given moment, because when you're breathing, you're actually turning on oxytocin. When you're breathing, you're giving your brain an opportunity to reduce the stress, which is giving yourself a chance for your thinking to come back online and for your short-term memory to turn on. If we are mindfully practicing, the hypothalamus is open for development throughout the lifespan. Through a mindfulness practice of breathing and becoming conditioned to breathe, we can increase our opportunity to turn on oxytocin in the moment of stress. And when we do that, it completely changes our response. Now, the other thing I'll encourage you to do is when someone's being stressful and then you start breathing, ask yourself, what age are they right now?
Yeah.
See them at a different age, because when we're stressed, we regress. So we regress to a deeper emotional age. See people at a younger emotional age, which takes away the perceived threat. Calm down even more. And then you can just be curious. You don't have to do anything. You can observe and say, oh, it's interesting. And then you're regulating yourself, which completely changes the dynamic.
Very cool. Well, I will definitely take advantage of this, because I was
Parents can do
surprised.
that with their children. It's the same thing I would teach a parent in a difficult situation with their child.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. Sometimes I shouldn't say, I might edit this out, but sometimes I joke about at home, I joke, we may not have children, but sometimes I feel like I have 106 of them at work.
It's true. When we're stressed, we regress. But we're not adults. When you're stressed, you regress. So we literally are children. And so that's why it's so important to see the emotional age. In Alan Shore's research, he did a meta-analysis of adults, and he said some adults in stress have the ability to revert to infancy. So it's an actual biological thing. When you become stressed, you regress. It's metaphorical, right? Well, I have 106 children, but it's all biological reality. And the key is that we have to stay in our adult brain while they're in their child brain, so we can help them to regulate and navigate back up to their adult brain.
And I usually do really quite well. This week, there was that one moment, I need to take a walk. I need to not react in the moment, because I was ready. I was like, woo, you said the wrong thing to me on a Monday,
That's right.
Anyway, well, thank you so much. I hope you'll, and I'm not trying to get free therapy sessions out of you, but I'd love to now go and read From Fear to Love. And if we could invite you back on, maybe we can dive even more deeply, and I'll have much more informed questions.
I'd love to.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Bryan, so much. Well, wish Corey had gotten to be here, but he will enjoy this episode and he'll enjoy to meet you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kendall.
Sometimes an interview surprises you. Bryan didn't just come here to talk about trauma, he came to hold space for it. This conversation was emotional for Kendall and really for me too. Because healing isn't always about the big dramatic reunions. It's about how you carry the stuff that no one else sees. Bryan offered language, insight, and care, and I hope you felt that too. You can find more of his work, including the Bondi app and his books, in our show notes. And if today's episode sparked something in you, don't ignore it. That's your story asking to be heard. You're not alone. Thanks for being with us, and remember, family secrets are the ultimate plot twist. Family Twist Podcast is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and produced by Halbakawi the Cabbage LLC.